Welcome to CubsPS Plus, the Northside Numbers Game, a weekly podcast that dives headfirst into the analysis of hot topics driving Chicago Cubs baseball. I'm your host, Mike Waller, a lifelong Cub fan, full-time baseball stat nerd, and now again a youth baseball coach. CubsPS Plus is part of the Bleacher Bunch Productions on the Fans First Sports Network, joining great shows like the Sun Ranto Show, Cup of Cubby Blue, and Baseball Rabbit Hole. The Bleacher Bunch feed is available wherever you get your podcasts, and CubsPS Plus is always available ad-free to Patreon supporters at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus, where you can support the show and find a variety of benefits for as little as $1 a month. In addition to the podcast feeds, you can also find me on Twitter or X, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus, the spin on the baseball metric OPS Plus. Love the pod or hate it? Please drop a review wherever it is you find your podcasts. If you've done that, thank you so much. Maybe you can share an episode with a friend. Welcome to episode 75, the Bad Bill episode of this podcast. No Cub players ever worn number 75, but Bill Dolan, who got his nickname due to his ferocious temper, posted 75.3 career Baseball Reference WAR. Dolan was a shortstop who played with the then Chicago Colts for 8 seasons, 1891 to 1898. He was consistently among the league's best hitters, and in 1894 he had a then-record 42-game hitting streak, which was broken just 3 years later by Wee Willie Keeler's 44-game streak, which stood until Joe DiMaggio shattered the record with his famed 56-gamer in 1941. After Dolan's streak ended with an 0-for-6 on August 7th, he hit in another 28 straight, giving him hits in 70 of 71 games. That year he slashed .359, .445, .556, and had a 138 OPS plus. With the Cubs 12 games in this week, I talked mostly about pitching. The starters have been mostly solid and the bullpen has been inconsistent, but there's a common thread across it all: efficiency. Fans are getting restless and it's likely too early for trading, so how much difference can even a little efficiency make? Let's discuss. Are you ready? I'm ready. Here we go. Well, it's been a minute since I recorded. My last episode came out after opening day. I had pre-recorded an interview with Matt Piro talking about pitching. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. I'll definitely have Matt back on to talk about pitching later in the year. We were traveling for spring break, and obviously I've had the stuff going on with my bicep, and you can see if you're watching on YouTube, I'm now in a brace. It locks me in and minimizes the amount that I can move. Pick up 10 degrees a week, and now I'm at 40 degrees off of full extension, so I've got 4 more weeks on the brace. And then I can start physical therapy and start getting back to normal. But you're not here to talk about me. Let's talk about the Cubs. So the Cubs are off to a pretty decent start, all things considered. And I think a lot of what I see discourse online, all the discussion stems around the pitching. But I want to start with what's working really well. So let's talk about the standings to start. I mean, the Cubs are off to a 7-5 start, had a very good chance to win the series in San Diego and maybe be 8-4. But they're 2 games out of first. The Central is surprisingly good. The Cardinals are probably the weakest team. Reds have had a bunch of injuries. Cardinals have some injury problems too. Pittsburgh surprisingly kind of running out front to start with. They're 9-3. A lot of young talent. They've got interesting pitching. They have a strong back end of their bullpen. And we'll see where it goes. I ultimately think they don't have the depth. We saw last year, Neil Cruz gets hurt. A couple other guys got hurt. And the depth behind them just wasn't there. But they do have a young, interesting team. If they stay healthy, they could absolutely be a factor. And that's why with this division, it's been talked about ad nauseum by a lot of people, including myself. But I think this division is going to stay pretty tight, top to bottom. I don't think anybody in this division is probably, barring just catastrophic injuries or things like that, I'm not sure anybody in this division is going to come in under like 77, 78 wins. Probably not a team in the division win more than 91 games. We'll see how it goes. A lot of time, I think the Pirates will fall off. They've done this before. It gets started well early, and then injuries and other things pile up. Looking around the league, nobody's really running away with things. I mean, LA probably looks like the best team. They have the best offense, but having some pitching issues. They sit with the best record second best record in the NL at 10-5, behind Pittsburgh's 9-3. Got Atlanta leading the East. 7-4 record, so they're, a half game better than the Cubs. Phillies are 6-6, Mets are 5-7. A couple truly dreadful teams, though. The Marlins are 2-11, they're awful. The Rockies are terrible. Giants are surprisingly off to a slow start, 5-8. Some of this, though, is schedule, so we'll see this as the year rolls on. The Cubs are playing a front-loaded schedule that's difficult. So look at the Cubs schedule so far. They opened with the defending champs, Texas Rangers. Strong offense, played at their park. And when you really get into it, they did come home and play the Rockies, and the Rockies are terrible. Cubs swept them like they should have. But now they're on a run where they won 2 out of 3 from the Dodgers. Now they just lost 2 out of 3 at San Diego. That's a good San Diego team. Now they go to Seattle. Seattle is one of the teams expected to contend for playoffs, potentially in the West. Then they go to Arizona. So San Diego, Seattle, and Arizona, that's a tough road trip. They come home, they get the Marlins. So hopefully they'll take care of business against the Marlins. But then the Astros come to town. And then they maybe a little bit of more of a mid-break with the Red Sox and the Mets. And then they get the Brewers. They get the Padres again. They get the Pirates. Maybe the Pirates will still be playing well. Atlanta, more against Pittsburgh. They're going to have 10 days that consists of 7 games against Pittsburgh and 6 games against Atlanta. Or not 10 days, so 2 weeks, basically. They'll go play at Pittsburgh and Atlanta, then come home to play Pittsburgh and Atlanta. I hate when baseball does the schedule that way, but that's how it is. And then, San Diego, Milwaukee, Cincinnati, then they get a true central stretch, leading them into June. So early in the season, getting all these tough teams, it's going to be a great test. Pittsburgh is 9-3, and they're surprisingly off to a good start, but they've also played weaker competition. They've played lesser teams, and that's going to even out over time. So we'll see how it goes. But when you look at the Cubs, the Cubs are scoring runs. They're averaging close to 8 runs a game. They did not do as well last night against San Diego, but that was one of those games they were facing Dylan Cease, and Dylan Cease was pitching well. But in the Rockies series, they scored 5, 12, and 9. In the Dodgers series, they scored 9 runs in the first game and 8 runs in the last game. Didn't get a lot in the middle game, but then they scored 8 runs, 5 runs, and then 2 runs against San Diego. So the offense is getting it done. And one thing I really like about what they're doing on offense is they're not chasing. They have, at least as of 2 days ago, they had the lowest chase rate as a team in Major League Baseball. And when you really look at their, team stats, and you look at, bringing that up on Fangraphs right now, I was looking at it before I started to record. If you look at strikeout rates, in terms of good strikeout rates, the Cubs are 10th. So upper third, they're striking out 20.6% of the time. But then for walk rates, they're second in baseball behind the Yankees at 12.2%. Yankees are at 13.1. Now we're still talking some small sample sizes here. It's been 11 games. But it's a really good sign. And the Cubs are getting through. They're seeing a lot of pitches. They're making pitchers work. And a lot of big counts. And they're hitting the ball hard. And one thing that I do like to see, and again, it's small sample size, so we're still at that point in the year. But if you look at batting average on balls in play, the BABIP, when a team is scoring runs at this kind of clip in a short period of time, I always want to look at the BABIP and see, are they having particularly good luck? Are they hitting 400 on balls in play? And right now in the season, the Cubs as a team are middle of the pack on BABIP. So it's 296. That puts them 15th in the league, which is right dead center. So that tells me they're not being particularly lucky or unlucky with the BABIP at this point. They're seeing pitches. They're having a good approach. Christopher Morel in particular, his K rate's way down. And what's interesting about him is he's not chasing hardly at all. He did a couple times yesterday. He's had a couple games where he struggled with the breaking ball. Yoshinobu Yamamoto the other day made him look absolutely ridiculous every time up with that. Yamamoto has a great curveball. It's super tight, moves. He's got 20% more vertical break on that curveball than the average Major League curveball. I mean, that thing's nasty. And Christopher had no answer for it. But he's not chasing pitches. And as hard as he hits the ball, if he's not chasing and he's making pitchers come in the zone, he's going to do a lot of damage. And let me bring his stats up right now. His strikeout rate's at 14%. Now, last year and the year before, he's been up at times pushing 40%. His walk rate's still only 6% because he's still super aggressive and he's still getting pitches in the zone. I don't know that he'll ever be a guy who walks at a 10 to 13% clip. But if he can keep those strikeouts, I expect it's going to come up. But he's at 50 plate appearances now. And for things like approach, for things like, seeing pitches, not chasing, K rates, you get north of 50 plate appearances, start moving towards 100, like the noise is really starting to come out at that point. So This may really, unless the league does something different to him and adjusts and changes how they're attacking him, this is a change that I think is going to be somewhat sticky. Now, I think his K rate probably will come up some from the 14% it is right now, but Christopher Morel striking out 22% of the time with his power, I mean, that will absolutely play. That is massive. And when you look at his numbers overall, his ISO is 255. That's a really high power rating. He's already got 3 home runs, hit a grand slam the other day. I just love the way that order slots. I mean, Ian Happ, especially against right-handers when he bats lefty. I can live with Nico taking the lead off when it's a righty on the mound, but I love Ian Happ in the leadoff spot. Seiya Suzuki looks like he's picking up where he left off last year. Good K rate. K rate's maybe a touch high, but 26% with again, as hard as he hits the ball, I can live with that. He's slashing 298, 375, 489, and he's got a 135 WRC plus at this point. Christopher Morel's got a 142 WRC plus. Stansby Swanson's 134. Michael Busch 132. Ian Happ 136. Garrett Cooper in 15 plate appearances is a 244. There's a sample size play that's going to come down. That is a 667 BABIP. But there's a lot to like. I really like the top of that lineup. Going Ian Happ, having Seiya Suzuki as your best hitter number 2. I've seen some questions about Bellinger at 3. He's off to a slow start. He's slashing 191, 291, 340 for a 63 WRC plus. His approach though looks good. He's hit a couple home runs. He's had some balls hit hard. He's keeping that strikeout rate down. He's at 18.2%. So he's still got that same 2-strike approach he was showing last year. So I think he's going to come around. I mean, if we get 2 or 3 more weeks down the road and he's still hitting sub 200, then maybe you got to look at switching it up, dropping him in the order or something like that. But right now, I like that. I like that against a right-hander, you get to go lefty, righty. That's not the end of the world, but it certainly is nice when you can do it. Michael Busch is looking like a dude. He's had a great approach all season. He had a good spring. He's got 2 homers, 7 RBIs already. He's in that range too, like I talk about with Morel. He's 25% K rate. If he can keep it about there, and again, he's at 44 plate appearances, so not quite as many as Morel. We still need to see a little bit more to see where that's going to go. And he's still a guy too that has not had a lot of time at the big league level. So whereas Christopher Morel has had the equivalent of basically a season and a half in the majors, maybe a little bit more than that. Michael Busch hasn't. So at some point, the league is also going to adjust how they pitch to him. So we'll see where that comes out. But if he can strike out, he's got a good approach. He's 13.6% walk rate. And that's something he's shown in the minor leagues. Good eye, good discipline at the plate. If he can keep that walk rate up above 11% and he can keep the strikeout rate 25, 26%, he's going to do a lot of damage. He's got big power and he's been looking really good. And I think across the offense, there's not a lot to dislike. We can talk about Morel at third base. I still think Morel playing third base, maybe not literally every day, but playing third base 3 times a week is huge for this team. It's going to give them the ability to make better use of that DH spot. We've seen it already. They give Happ sort of a half day off where he's in the lineup, but he's, DHing. Same thing with Seiya. You can just mix and match with a lot of guys. You can get guys in off the bench. You can get Mike Tauchman in the outfield. You can get Garrett Cooper in the lineup. But I think what we really want to talk about is pitching. And this is one where I think all offseason, a lot of Cub fans want to see more. I would have liked to have seen them do more as well. They did pick up Shota Imanaga, and he just looks absolutely electric. I mean, I've got his numbers up now. He's thrown 10 innings. He got a little bit hosed by the weather in that game with the Dodgers. He's striking out almost 11 guys per 9 innings. Has not walked a guy yet. There's just so much to like for all the talk about him being a fly ball pitcher and giving up a lot of home runs. He's no dummy. He knows how he pitches. And if you watch him pitch, his best pitch is that elevated fastball. He's got great backspin on it. So it's got that great induced vertical break where it looks like it's a rise ball. It's not actually rising, but it's not dropping as much as a hitter thinks it would. And being able to play up in the zone like that, I mean, his fastball is playing a couple miles an hour faster than it actually is. We saw Dodgers late on it pretty consistently. He's got some good pitches to play off it. He's in the zone. He's keeping hitters off balance. And because he keeps that fastball up, it's a really tough pitch to get on top of, to get your hands up and really drive that ball. So he gets a lot of weaker fly balls, pop flies on the infield. And that's how it's going to be. And he also knows, he's been around. He's not an idiot. He can stand at Wrigley when it's cold and look and see that the wind is blowing in. And in one of his starts, opening day, wind was blowing in pretty hard, so he could just go do it and not have a lot of worries. And then when he pitched against the Dodgers, the winds were a little bit different. There were a little bit more currents going out, and he was able to play in that space and keep them, keep that Dodger and that nasty Dodger line pretty much off the board. So there's a lot to like there. But, opening day, it's ironic that Matt and I were talking about pitcher injuries and stuff like that. And literally we recorded on opening day, but it was before the Cubs game, so we didn't have any chance to talk about Justin Steele, who came up with a leg injury, is now going to miss probably a month plus. And then Jameson Taillon's not back yet. Kyle Hendricks is looking kind of iffy at this point. The Cubs have lost Julian Merriweather for now probably at least 2 months. He's got rib stress fracture in his back. And they say that's going to take basically a month of rest with no baseball activities to heal. And then once he heals, then he has to ramp back up. And that's probably going to be a 4-week process. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him land on the 60-day injured list if the Cubs need to start making some moves here soon. But people want the Cubs to do more. So they brought in Shota. There were a lot of other pitchers out there. I want the Cubs to go hard after Yamamoto. I don't know how serious he was about going anywhere other than LA, and then LA gave him a bag. So, I don't know. People were talking about Jordan Montgomery, Blake Snell. Would have been happy with either of those guys. Personally, I like Montgomery more than Snell, but it also got to a point where, the Cubs need pitching help right now. Steele's out. Taillon hasn't gotten back yet, although he threw a simulated game. I think I have not looked it up. I think he did a rehab start last night or the day before. He's scheduled to do at least one more, and then hopefully in the next week or so he can be up and help them out. But, Kyle Hendricks has struggled. Jordan Wicks has looked really good. Ben Brown pitched really well in his first career start against the Padres in the win on Wednesday. But I think what was made really, really clear to me is that I don't think it was about being cheap. The Cubs right now have the CBT threshold right around $233 to $235 million, with a $237 million competitive balance tax threshold for the first year. I've talked about it before, but a lot of players have incentive clauses, and some players are going to hit those clauses this year. So the Cubs basically are already effectively over the tax. I think they will go over the tax. I think they will add during the first half of the season, whether it's picking up guys on waivers, maybe making some small deals in the near term, but then I think they'll be aggressive at the trade deadline as well. But I think the Cubs really put a lot of trust in the organization that they have and the farm system that they have. I think they wanted to see Jordan Wicks get a chance to start. I think they wanted to see Javier Assad, Ben Brown, some of those guys be in the mix for bullpen roles or taking that first shot if a starter gets hurt. And I think that's an okay strategy. I think one thing that I think is very clear, the Cubs have done this in the past. They did it in 2015, 2016, really even into 2018. If you can establish a lineup, pitching rotation, bullpen that has a large number of homegrown young players on it, you can start to extend those guys over the time. I've talked about rising arbitration costs and all of that, but those guys are cheaper than established mid-career, peak career free agents. What that does is it gives you if you can fill 4 or 5 of your starting lineup positions, if you can fill a bench spot or 2, if you can you've got 8 relievers typically in the bullpen. If 5 of those are homegrown arms, maybe a few more rotating on that Iowa Des Moines shuttle. If you can get 2 or 3 starting pitchers that are homegrown young guys, that creates so much flexibility, and not in the cheap way. and we'll see what the Cubs do with it. But what Theo did was he used that cost-controlled basis of a team that allowed him to go spend big money on John Lester and Jason Hayward, and eventually sign Yu Darvish when Lester was phasing out. It lets you go and spend more concentrated dollars on bigger star players. And there have been a lot of complaints the last couple off seasons that the Cubs didn't get some of the bigger fish. Dansby Swanson was the biggest contract they offered. Cody Bellinger this year got the highest AAV, but on a short deal with opt-outs. Especially the previous offseason when they signed Dansby and Jamison Tyne. They needed a lot of guys. They had a lot of holes to fill. They needed a lot more depth. I think the Cubs are sitting in a much better position now. And this year, I think the Cubs were reportedly in on several of those guys. I think the money didn't get to where Jed wanted it to be. We can argue whether that's a legitimate point or not. But the reality is, I think they wanted to see these guys. You can always go get starters at the deadline. You can always go get relievers at the deadline. Probably starting in June, teams will be a lot more open to trade. I see people on Twitter right now saying, like, Jed, just go make a trade. But who's trading at this point? Every team is 10, 11, 12 games into the season. And even if you're an absolute drag, if you're the A's, if you're Marlins or the White Sox, why would you deal at this point unless the Cubs just make a big overpay offer? And if Jed feels like he needs to do that for a guy, then fine, go do it. Cubs have the prospect depth where they can afford an overpay. But for the most part, there's not a lot out on the trade market yet because, who's going to trade their top starter or their top bullpen guy before like the second homestand? Teams are going to let this play for a little bit. Guys who signed as free agents in the offseason, whether they were a star or, guy on a one-year deal, those guys can't be traded until June 15th, or at least they have no trade protection until June 15th, so they have a say in it. So really, it's mid-June heading into the deadline when things really, really get heated and really start taking off. And that also gives teams, I talked about this some last year, there's the sample size argument. Some individual things do start to settle out at 50 to 100 plate appearances. Some other stats take a little bit longer, defensive metrics. Like, if a guy goes in the game, he's going to get 4 plate appearances for the most part. If a starter goes out there, unless it's just a horrific game, he's going to go throw 4 to 7 innings. He's going to throw anywhere between probably 70 and 100 pitches. And you can have that reliably set up. So that, 5 starts, a guy might be at 400 to 450 pitches. So then you've got a pretty good size sample on whether he's throwing strikes. What pitch does he like the most? Whatever. With a hitter, again, you can stack those up, and that after a month of baseball games, a regular everyday player probably has 20 starts, probably is pushing 100, 110 plate appearances, depending on where they bat in the order. And that's going to give you a sample size you can start to work with. Defensively, you might play in 5 games and have no balls hit to you. You might play 1 game and have like 6 balls hit your way. So some of the things are hard to measure, but you start getting to May, you get into May a little bit. One of my frustrations last year was with the Mancini and Hosmer stuff. We saw it with Mervis. We saw it with Hosmer first. Hosmer hit exactly 100 plate appearances and then he was let go. I think they clearly wanted to get him. I don't know that they really wanted to get him exactly to that point, but clearly they wanted to get him enough playing time where they felt like they had an appropriate sample size to make a decision, and they let him go. Matt Mervis is a little bit more complicated because Cody Bellinger's injury kind of forced him to come back and play first, which probably prevented Mervis from getting a second shot. But, he ended the season with 99 major league plate appearances. Mancini went a little bit longer, but he had a 2-year contract too, so of course they were going to give him longer leash. He went up with, I think, 167, something like that. Maybe it was 267. But so they're going to want this to play out a little bit. Right now, even the relief pitchers, there's been a lot of angst about Jose Cuas. He's really struggled. Hector Neris hasn't quite looked himself. Neris has thrown 3 2/3 innings. Jose Cuas has thrown 6 innings. Luke Little's thrown 5. Adbert Alzolay doesn't look quite as sharp as he did midseason last year, but he's thrown 5 2/3 innings. So before the Cubs are going to take drastic steps, now I do think it would not surprise me if Jose Cuas gets optioned to Iowa. He's got option. I think he has 2 options left, but he certainly has at least one. Would not surprise me to see him go down to Iowa and get the kinks out. One of the threads that I've seen coming out of the bullpen, when the bullpen has struggled, and that's happened against Colorado, they blew a big lead. They blew a big lead against the Padres the other night. When the bullpen is coming in and giving up runs, the reliever is not necessarily just straight up awful. They're coming out of the bullpen and they're just not effective at the jump. And sometimes you can get away with that if you're just coming in, you're going to take the 6th inning and you're starting the inning clean. Maybe you can afford to walk a guy, give up a hit, whatever, settle in and get out of it. But like Jose Cuas, I'll use that from Saturday. So Wicks had pitched a really good game, got to, scoreless in the 4th or in the 5th. I think Wicks wound up throwing, 4 2/3. Couple guys on base. One guy on base. I can't remember the exact scenario right now in front of me. But they went ahead. He had 100 pitches. They went to Cuas. And Cuas came in and he walked Teoscar Hernandez. So put another runner on base. Then he threw a wild pitch, which scored the first run. And then he gave up, he was facing Max Muncy. And because he had been wild, because he had walked a guy, thrown a wild pitch, you got to get this over the plate. He wound up throwing a fastball that caught way too much middle. And Muncy hit it off the right field wall. It was a single, but 2 runs scored. And all of a sudden now, faced 2 batters, and it's now 3-0. And the Cubs would wind up losing 4-1 in that game. We saw that in reverse with San Diego the other night. So when Ben Brown was pitching, he was facing off against Joe Musgrove. And Musgrove was pitching pretty well. He was probably a little inefficient, got his pitch count up a little bit. But all of a sudden in the 5th, scoreless game through 4. Brown holds them scoreless in the top of the Cubs come up in the top of the 5th. And Musgrove gives up a solo home run to Yan Gomes. So 1-0 Cubs. Happ gets on. Seiya gets on. Like Happ walks. Seiya got a single. He hits Bellinger in the foot with a curveball. So now, and then they pull Musgrove out. So they bring in Stephen Kolek, who's a rookie. Bases loaded, nobody out, already down 1-0. And Kolek fell behind 2-0 on Christopher Morel. And so you're behind Morel. You got to come. He knows you have to come in. He knows he's going to get a fastball. And he's just sitting on it. And he just crushes the grand slam. And so Stephen Kolek comes in. He wound up pitching actually really well in that game. He struck out. I know he struck out 4 of the 6 outs he got. I don't think he gave up more than maybe one other hit for the rest of the time he was in the game. Really effective. Really looked good. Fooled the Cubs on some pitches. But he was not ready at the jump, and that was the part that mattered. And at that point, it was 5-0. Cubs wound up winning the game 5-1. And so it's not about, Jose Cuas, after he gave up those 3 runs, he got the last out. He pitched the next inning. He looked really good in that next inning. That's the Jose Cuas I'm kind of excited about. I think he's a guy who can stick and be effective in this bullpen for several years. I think he's got really good movement on his fastball. He's got some funk to his delivery with that kind of Scotty Efros, almost sidearmy kind of style. But he's got to be able to come in and throw strikes without grooving fastballs. And those are the 2 things he's had trouble with so far this year. And I think some of it's confidence. I think he came out, he was throwing his slider, he was throwing some of his off pitches against the Dodgers, and they were all over the place. So then I think, he came in with the big lead in the game where they wound up losing the 8-0 lead to lose 9-8 on Tuesday. On Monday. And I think it was still in his head from the lack of control over the weekend, and he came in throwing more fastballs, and they just jumped him. I think the first 3 batters hit first pitch fastballs. And, Quas has taken a lot of blame over the last week, totally understandably. He's not pitched well. I'm sure he would be the first one to tell you that. But the idea that Jose Quas single-handedly lost that game on Monday is just factually not true. Number one, Dansby Swanson made an error on one of those hard hit balls when he first came in. That led to 2 unearned runs. There was another play later that wound up being a triple. Couldn't give Tauchman an error for it exactly, but Mike Tauchman misplayed that ball. He took a terrible angle. And again, I'm sure he'd be the first one to tell you that. Gave up extra bases. But still, it was 8-5 still when Quas left. As much damage as he caused, as much as he gave up, it was still 8-5 when he left the game. Then Luke Little comes in and he looked pretty decent to start, gave up the home runs, then it's 8-7, and that was the 6th run was the last one assigned to Quas. And then when Little came out the next inning, he was shaky again, put some guys on base. Hector Neris came in and didn't really give anything up, but he didn't really look great either. And then, when he started the bottom of the 8th, guy on base, getting out, and then they had to go to Adbert Alzolay to get 5 outs. And that didn't happen either. So it was a combination of a bunch of guys were not sharp. And that's going to be key, right? Because it's early season anyway. And often early in the season, you don't see guys going super deep as starters. A few of the aces might, but even like if Justin Steele was healthy, they still wouldn't be pushing him that much. You want to pace guys out over a season. They're still kind of building up. Guys at this point should be built up to go. If you had a healthy spring training, you're an established starting pitcher, you should be good to go 85, 90 pitches at this point, and maybe push past. We've seen the Cubs go 100 pitches a couple times for some guys, even some young guys. But, you're just not going to be asked in April, especially when you're pitching in some of these cold weather locations, to go 7-8 innings. That's not even the way the game's really played today, but, you're going to see a lot more starts this time of year where guys aren't quite sharp yet. They're still settling in. They're going 5 innings. Maybe they're going 6. You got to cover some of these other innings. And you're going to have to work a lot of guys through the bullpen. And the relievers have got to be sharper than they've been. I mean, you look at the Cubs have struggled. Neris hasn't looked himself. Hopefully he's healthy. Mark Leiter Jr. has looked great. Every time I get to a point where maybe I'm pretty skeptical of Mark Leiter Jr., he just makes me look like an idiot. So I guess I'll keep coming out here and saying bad things about him so he keeps pitching well. Daniel Palencia has had some good and some bad. His first outing, he ate 3 innings and it showed Imanaga win. Well, he didn't get the win because he couldn't go 5 innings because of the rain delay. But he looked good in that one. He struggled a little bit last night. Yancy Almonte's been up and down. Drew Smiley's been up and down. Luke Little on the whole has looked pretty good. Want to see a little bit more efficiency there. Quas has struggled. Alzolay hasn't been himself. And so what's going to be interesting is the Cubs have just had some of these situations where the starters haven't been super efficient. So we'll go back to the Dodgers series. When Wicks started on the Saturday game, he was good. I mean, he got 6 strikeouts in 5 innings, didn't give up a lot of damage, made guys look pretty silly at times, but especially starting the game, he was missing arm side on a lot of his fastballs. He was up and into lefties. And when you start stacking that up, he was at 27 pitches through 1 inning. He was at 51 pitches through 2. And you start to carry that. Guys at 51 pitches through 2, that's 2 pretty taxing innings. It's not the 50 pitches so much. It's the 27, 24 pitches without sitting down. Ideally, a guy would want to be somewhere between, ideally, you'd be under 15 pitches. That's kind of where Shota Imanaga was for several innings. Ben Brown hung right around 16 the other day. You definitely want to be under 20 pitches per inning, and that's going to give you the ability to go, if you're under 20 pitches per inning, you're going to be able to go 5. If you're down around 15 or under that, that's when you can start talking about going 6, 7. And then, once you're built up, once we're mid-season, then guys can start looking, instead of maybe having a limit of 95, 100 pitches, maybe they have the ability in a big game to be able to go 105, 110. And that's when you start getting to, maybe 7, maybe you come out and start the 8th kind of thing. But right now they're not there. And guys are not being efficient enough, which meant that, Wicks had to come out after 4 2/3. And so then the Cubs had to cover 5 1/3 with the bullpen. And they had Shota Imanaga going the next day, and it looked like Shota was pitching well enough to maybe be able to go 7. But then there was a big rain delay, which takes Imanaga out of the game, and the Cubs had to go fill another 5 innings out of the bullpen. So they went to San Diego for that game, for the first game that they lost, where they blew the 8-0 lead. They had 4 guys who were down. Palencia had thrown 3 innings on Saturday. He wasn't pitching. Drew Smiley threw like 50 pitches on Friday, so he was still down. Almonte and Leiter had thrown 2 consecutive days, so they were pretty much unavailable. And that put them in a position where they had Quas and Little and Neris and Alzolay, and you want that to be enough. And if it was a 9-8 game with 2 unearned runs, with a misplay in right field, with 4 different guys not being sharp, if, over the course of a season, there are going to be days like this. There are also going to be days where guys just actually execute their pitches. If any of those 4 guys had been pretty sharp and on their game, maybe the Cubs give up some of the runs. Maybe Quas still has a horrendous day, but, Luke Little is able to get out of it and then not give up the home. Maybe Neris is able to really get out of the 7th, nail down the 8th, and get it to Alzolay with a clean night. Maybe when it's not a 1-run lead, maybe at that point it's still a 2 or 3 run. Guys have to be able to execute their pitches, but that's where these threads of inefficiency, these threads of not quite being able to cover enough innings go. And it's not a matter of more guys in the bullpen. The Cubs are carrying the maximum 13 pitchers. They've got 5 starters. I really don't have any complaints about the starting rotation. Kyle Hendricks has struggled, but it's actually been pretty bad. His first 2 starts were awful. Yesterday he started better. He gave up a couple runs early on, just ridiculous. I don't think there was a single ball hit with more than 70 miles an hour exit velo, but he gave up a couple runs. He did wind up getting hit harder later. So hopefully they'll figure out what's wrong with him, and hopefully he's not hurt. Hopefully that shoulder's fine and he'll settle in. He's done this before. He's not a fast starter. He doesn't start games fast, and he typically doesn't start seasons fast. Shota Imanaga has been great. Jordan Wicks has been very good. Ben Brown looked really good. Javier Assad looked really good. They all just, Wicks and Assad especially, want to see them get a little bit more efficient with their pitches. Ben Brown didn't go 5 innings the other day. I think maybe he could have. I understand why Counsell pulled him. But Counsell also said he's not fully stretched out yet. So he's not in a position to go 85, 90 pitches. He was more in a 75 pitch count, and he threw, 77 or 79 is where it was when they pulled him. But he looked really good for those pitches, and he was right about 16 pitches per inning. And that's a good place for him to be. So there's a lot to like on the starting side. They also have, Cade Horton's going to get going here probably pretty soon. He'll be available. They've got some, potentially Hayden Wisniewski. He's been working on starting Iowa. But I think the bullpen is the thing to watch. And right now, this is where I talked earlier during the offseason about how the bullpen would be made up given the options and lack of options. So when you look down the reliever set, at this point, I think we would have to consider Ben Brown and Javier Assad starters until Wicks and Steele come back. Mark Leiter Jr. doesn't have options. Hector Neris doesn't have options. Julian Merriweather doesn't have options. Daniel Palencia does. Yency Almonte does not. Luke Little does. Jose Quas does. Drew Smiley does not. And Alzolay does have an option here left. So you look at the guys who are struggling, and Quas could go down. It'll actually surprise me if unless he comes out and immediately starts pitching better. I'll be surprised if he doesn't go down to Iowa at some point very soon. But Yency Almonte, he was really good in 2022. He struggled last year. He's been a mixed bag so far this year. He's going to get some run. Like, they're not just going to DFA him now. This is what we talk about, those sample sizes, wanting to see enough from a guy. And I think certainly he's going to have to get through, unless he's just falls off and is worse than he's been, horrendous. I mean, there are some things to like. He's striking out 12.5 per 9 innings. Got giving up too many homers, walking too many guys. ERA is high, but early season ERA is problematic to start with, and especially when you talk about relievers. You come in for one game, you've pitched 5, let's take Almonte. He's thrown 5 innings, and let me pull him up and look at his game log. You have one outing where you come in and get 1 out and give up 3 runs. I mean, your ERA is going to balloon. It's going to take a month to get that thing back down into any kind of semblance. So let's look at his game log. His last outing against San Diego, he was sharp. He went 1-2-3 in the win the other day. 1-2-3 inning, 2 Ks. The inning before that, last time he pitched against LA was the same. 1-2-3 inning, 2 Ks. The game before that, he gave up a run in an inning. Gave up a couple hits in a run, 2 Ks. But the one before that against Colorado in that game where the Cubs blew that big lead, he threw a third of an inning, faced 4 batters, gave up 1 hit, 3 runs, 2 walks. I mean, that's just going to tank your numbers at that point. But before that, it was another 1 1/3 inning scoreless. And then I think it was actually opening day, he pitched and, gave up a run in a third of an inning. So he's had some good and some bad, but we've seen some good out of him. And so he's certainly not going anywhere at this point, but you can't send him down. So the Cubs are going to have to get to a point where he is either just a part of this bullpen or they're DFA him and cut ties. I know there's some fans out there saying, well, yeah, go ahead and cut ties now. It's a very difficult time of the year to just go get 4 relievers. Like I already talked about, nobody's trading. The Cubs do have some options. They've got Keegan Thompson and Hayden Wisniewski are down in AAA now on the 40-man roster. Could get called up. There's some younger guys like Michael Arias on the 40-man roster, but those guys aren't ready. They were put on for Rule 5 protection and potential use later in the season, that type of thing. There are a couple interesting guys who are not on the 40-man roster, though. So they've got Carl Edwards Jr. just came back. I think he just pitched in his first game, or maybe he's going to today. So he's not ready to be called up yet. But then they had Sam McWilliams as a non-roster invitee, and he's giving up some runs. He's struck out 13 in like 7 innings. So he's getting a lot of whiff, and he's an interesting guy. I would have to go back and look at his batted ball numbers. I don't know if his ERA is a bit high, but could have just been 1 outing that went to crap. Thomas Pannone has also thrown really well. He's got something like 12 strikeouts in 6 innings, something like that. None of those 3 guys are on the 40-man, but that's where the Julian Merriweather injury might come into play. He's going to miss, it sounds like, easily a month, so roughly 30 days. Let's say it's 4 weeks. They were saying 4 weeks and 4 weeks. So if he misses 4 weeks to rest and then 4 weeks to get his strength back up, start throwing, do minor league rehab, all that kind of stuff, that's 56 days. Odds are he's not going to be, the dream state recovery. So throwing an extra 4 days in there to get him on the 60-day injured list right now and open up a 40-man roster spot might be the play in the short term, because they're going to want to make sure that I don't want to rush Merriweather back. I don't know a ton about that injury, but anything with your back and your ribs is quite painful. So I can't imagine cracked rib in your back is all that great. So they're going to want to make sure that he is back healthy before they bring him back up. So I think the 60-day makes perfect sense. It gives them the ability to take McWilliams or Pannone or Edwards and add them to the 40 and bring them up. For, Quas could go down. Some of those other guys could go down. So I think near term, I trust Craig Counsell. He's got a great track record with bullpens. We'll see what this bullpen is, but a lot of bullpens are crapshoots early in the season. Guys are figuring out their roles. Relief pitchers are notoriously, some of it's a sample size, right? You look at the stats and a guy has a great year one year, but he made 50 appearances and he threw 60 innings. A starter does that in 60 innings, 5 innings to start, like 12 starts. That's a couple months, but that's an entire season for a reliever. And so they're going to want to see more. They're going to want to see some more sample size, see who these guys are, see what works. So don't look for the Cubs to make a lot of moves. Like I said, I'll be surprised if they don't send Quas down. I think they can play with Julian Merriweather's 40-man spot by putting him on the 60-day IL. So there are some guys in play. We will as some of this comes up, is if there are more injuries, we're going to start seeing more of the Des Moines, Chicago shuttle guys are optioned up and down. But they don't have a wide range of guys to work with right now. So they're going to have to work with the guys they have and start to play around with what the right mix is, see who steps up and fills the spot. There's been a lot of talk about whether Adbert's a closer. I still think he can be. Now, is Adbert ever going to be the best closer in the league? I don't know that he has that stuff. But, I mean, last year, until he got totally worn down late in the season, and now he's got that to build off of, he converted 22 of his 25 saves. So there's no doubt he can be a solid closer. Is he the dream state? Maybe not. But again, like, you can always get a closer at the deadline too. So, and right now there's so many pitching injuries. It just almost scares me to death to trade for a guy. Talk about trading for Perez from Miami came up during the offseason, and trading for Shane Bieber was a hot topic, and then they're both down. Spencer Strider's hurt. He looks like he might be heading for some sort of UCL elbow surgery. It's ugly out there, and the Cubs are just going to have to make do with what they have. Hopefully they continue to hit. Hopefully the starters continue to do their thing. If they can get Steele and Tyone back in the next, hopefully get Tyone back in the next week or so and get Steele back, within the next few weeks. And that's going to make a big difference, because then you start to have more flexibility in the bullpen. When those two guys are back, Assad and Ben Brown could be sent back to Iowa to start if they want to keep them stretched out, keep them on that basis. But both of those guys can also go into the bullpen. Assad's just been effective wherever he goes. I've talked about him before, but like if you look at his StatCast data, his measurables, they don't jump off the page. It's a real mixed bag. Like he does give up a pretty high barrel rate, but yet at the same time, over the course of basically a season and pretty much the equivalent of a full season at this point, between the end of 2022 and what he did last year, he doesn't give up a lot of hard contact. It's a lot of weak contact, but he doesn't get any chase, doesn't get any whiff, but he's typically in the strike zone, keeps guys off balance. And there are reasons to think the way his two-seamer plays and the way his slider plays off the two-seamer, that he might just be a guy that doesn't fit the models. Like the projections always are waiting for him to fall back to earth and tank, and it's just not happening. So we'll see. He gets another half season doing what he's been doing. I think at that point you just have to say it's sticky. Ben Brown looked really good the other day. He's got a really good fastball curveball pairing. That fastball really plays up. He was pretty consistently 96 to 98. Curveball had guys off balance, got a lot of nice break to it. It's pretty tight. That shows me that he's got a pretty high floor. Ideally, he would still get another off-speed pitch to play off the curveball, give hitters a different look if he's going to go through the order 2 or 3 times. But there are guys now showing that, by varying the way you throw your fastball and the balance of curveballs for strikes versus burying curveballs in the dirt, you can get by with 2 pitches. Ideally, he'd get a third, but it's got to be a major league ready pitch to be able to do it. But if he can't, and even if he struggles as a starter, and so far I don't see any reason to necessarily expect that, other than pitching in Major League Baseball is really hard and a lot of guys struggle as starters. But you put his stuff in the bullpen where guys are only going to see him once, and he's coming in out of the pen throwing 97 plus, and he's got that nasty curveball, that will play in the back end of a bullpen all day long. So you get Steele and Tyone back, at least one of those guys probably goes in the bullpen. Then you also start having more flexibility because Brown and Assad have options. They can go up and down. At some point, maybe Wesneski comes back and plays into the bullpen. Maybe he actually starts at some point. There just get to be more and more options. And then they'll have to look and decide over time if they're going to add more guys. If you want to give McWilliams and Edwards a shot, you can probably free up one spot for a while with the Merriweather. But then at that point, like, who's next on the list to get that DFA? Is it Keegan Thompson? Is there somebody else who maybe the Cubs think they can sneak through waivers? We'll just have to see how things go. But I think there's reason to be optimistic. I think this team is probably, I thought the bullpen would be stronger to start the season, but I also thought the offense wouldn't be as good. So I think they're kind of landing in about where I thought they'd be. I think they'll be an above average team. Like I said, I predicted them for 89 wins. I think they're going to win this division, and that's all right in front of them right now. They've looked competitive against good opponents. They've looked dominant against a bad team, and that's a good place to be. They just need to get through this stretch when they've got the pitcher injuries and they're playing tough teams. Just keep the head above water, be 500 or better in April. Get through May and don't do the 10-18 May thing like they did last year. If they can get through and be 500 plus in late May, a little over 500 in June, early June, they're going to be in a good place because that schedule does, you have to play all the teams in baseball. So they're still going to play 4 games against the White Sox. They're still going to play I haven't looked at the American League standings lately, but let's take a look at that. But they're going to have to play they're going to play the A's. They're going to play the White Sox. They're going to play, let's see who's bad in the AL so far. The whole AL East is good as always. Twins are struggling. The AL Central is playing pretty well right now. We'll see how that holds up, especially Guardians are 9-3, but they just lost Shane Bieber, so we'll see how that goes. At some point, some of these teams are selling off parts too. Astros are really struggling, surprisingly, but they're going to play all the teams. They're going to play all the division foes. They're going to play the bad teams in the National League. So there are going to be opportunities later to stack up wins while you're playing, after you play all the tough teams. Now, you just have to not play your way out of the race. I don't think they will. I think they're a good team. I thought they showed good resilience the other day, blowing that big lead and then coming back and winning the next day. I think this team's going to be mentally tough. Craig Counsell knows what he's doing. So we'll continue to watch, but I think right now the things to watch, making sure they continue to hit. Can the starters get a little bit more efficient? And I'm not talking going 7-8 innings, but can they, very consistently clear 5, get into the 6th, and occasionally, throw 6 to give the bullpen a little bit of a day off? And then can the relievers just come in and, even if they're not dominant, can they come in and be throwing strikes and get some guys out in tough spots when they first come in the game? That's what I'm looking for. But the Cubs are heading to Seattle this weekend. Seattle's a good team. They're going to face some really good pitching, and hopefully the bats can stay hot. Keep that top 4 going. Hopefully Christopher Morel keeps the chasing in check. And we'll see how it goes. And I'll talk to you guys again soon. Go Cubs. Thank you for joining me today. If you liked this episode, please drop a rating and a review wherever it is you get your podcasts. And share an episode with a friend. Just a few seconds from you gives me great feedback and helps other Cub fans find the show. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube, all at CubsPS Plus. And check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/CubsPS Plus to help support the show. As always, the theme music for this podcast is Prospect Park West by Jerry McCoy. This is Mike Waller, host of the CubsPS Plus podcast. Every day with Cubs baseball or talking about Cubs baseball is a great day. Go Cubs!